HMR here. This video is partially in response to a comment on the video I did that BPD is not DID on March 18th, 2020. And I'm going to answer this commenter's question and also go into more detail. So this video, really, the topic is borderline projective identification. It's object-other relating. It's not anything to do with dissociative identity disorder or having alters. And the commenter's question is as follows. Isn't the identity disturbance more like associative identity with an idealized person? To me, this gives some insight as to why someone with BPD takes on another person's thought patterns and ideals and defends them as their own. So my response was, no, it's not that people with BPD have associative identity disturbance with an idealized person. It's firstly a lack of self, an unknown self, which is ego fragmentation, but not like what's beyond ego fragmentation in DID of its efficacy in the way that it's described. In people with BPD, the child part of identity emotionally and psychologically arrests. This creates a fragmented, unstable sense of self. Projective identification, which is a person with BPD in an unconscious way, they attribute something inside of self that cannot be tolerated or that is unacceptable to them, and it could be at a subconscious level as well, and they project that onto another person, and then they believe and or perceive the other person to be characterized by them appropriately and justifiably. People with BPD merge or fuse with, quote, object other, unquote, and have no ego boundaries between self and others. So when I'm referring to the fact that people with BPD, untreated of course, or not until unless a significant treatment are getting on the path to recovery, but when they perceive the other person to be characterized by them appropriately and justifiably, that's the projective identification aspect of object-other relations. So they're really seeing the idealized parent or the devalued parent in the other person, and not always, but rarely in some people's cases with BPD do they ever actually see the other person. So there's a merging there of this unstable identity, which is a lack of self, which is due to emotional arrested development. So the self, or the seeds of the self, are still there to be retrieved in therapy for a person to, among other things that's part of BPD recovery, for a person to actually mature, find that seed of authentic self in the fragmented off child ego state, is the way that it's put in transactional analysis, Dr. Aaron Burns' modality. And then the process of therapy, among many other things, is helping the person with BPD to reparent this, to find and get under the layers of defenses, to find this fragmented, split off from inner child, and to then mature and grow that inner child in ways that the arrested emotional development stopped them from being able to grow this self inside when they were very young, due to very adverse childhood experiences. So this loss of self and unstable identity in people with BPD, it's not multiple identities or dissociative identity disorder, but it sees the person closest to a person with BPD being perceived subconsciously as good mother object other, not had in the 75% with BPD, and bad mother object other in devaluation. And this is a subconscious process. Some people with BPD may have some awareness. They may even be able to talk to people about it that they're close to, or after they've behaved rather poorly to someone, been triggered, dysregulated, etc., and behaved really poorly, which I'm not here to defend. Often people with BPD with not that much treatment or no treatment, if they get any insight at all to this, it's intellectual insight. Important to keep that in mind, because it's not emotional, so it's not in their emotional landscape, so it's not going to create change. People often think, oh, my wife, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my husband with BPD, oh, seems so aware now, can actually talk about this. Oh, this is great. Well, it is. It's wonderful. And it's a step in the right direction. But it's intellectual. And until they get into a process of therapy and recovery, really engaging it, it's not going to come down into the emotional landscape. It's not going to change behavior. It's not going to help people with BPD to learn who they are, to lay down those primal defenses, and to be able to create change. In moving toward knowing their authentic selves. But so BPD triggers are activated inside a person with BPD and then subconsciously experienced as coming from the object other. That's the projective identification piece of that as well in splitting. They aren't really taking on another's thought patterns as much as they're subconsciously experiencing the lack of self through other in this projective identification, often subconscious way of trying to feel like they exist through you. People with BPD without treatment have no ego boundaries, so they don't know where they end and you begin. People with BPD externalize into the closest person, the object other, all that they cannot subconsciously contain feelings about or within because they have no container of self to allow for that due to arrested emotional development, lack of self, unstable sense of self. Not multiple selves, as is the case in DID, which is extremely rare, I want to say again. So what people with BPD are doing, it's a disavowing of one's own internal emotional landscape and feelings, and then experiencing that through other, as if it's coming from other. So it's feelings and aspects of self not known, projective identification put on and into other, and then they think it's mirroring who they are. And it doesn't quite work that way, because the people with BPD are doing projective identification toward or onto are actually, as you know, you are real people. You have your own thoughts and your own feelings. This confuses and triggers people with BPD on an emotional level because they are experiencing themselves through you. So you're not supposed to all of a sudden be different from what they expect or how they feel. In terms of people with BPD being helped to leave an abusive relationship, so this is a different twist, really. Suppose it was with a narcissist or a psychopath. They will have merged and fused their, quote, sense of self, unquote, to a really harmful individual, narcissist or psychopath, as object other, in the same way that they would with somebody who isn't a cluster B at all. And this plays out repetition compulsions from their core adverse childhood experience, and many with BPD then lack the ability to feel, quote, real, unquote, or as if they exist without object other, even if that is in an adverse, unhealthy, toxic relationship with a narcissist or a psychopath, or could even be another person with BPD. And if this plays out where they don't see you for who you really are versus seeing you as object other, which is, again, subconscious and projective identification, so they don't see the partner or the closest person to them for who you really are. And they won't without significant treatment. So then one of two things unfolds: incessant abandonment fear that sees some with BPD remain clingy and needy, others rejecting, quote, self, unquote, projected onto, quote, object other as wounding parent, and then withdrawing in the case of the quiet borderline, or raging in the case of the externalizing borderline, and often then abandon you, quote, object other, unquote. So they're really abandoning again It's a repetition compulsion for what they experienced in the 75% of cases with their parent, the wounding parent. But when they reject or abandon or pull away from you as object other, obviously you are there. You are invested. You care and or love this person, and you feel the brunt of that, and it makes no sense to you because it's not about you. It's really about they're re-experiencing you as the object other wounding parent in devaluation, and when they've been really triggered too, whichever way they react. So they want to abandon object other, that's you, if you're with somebody with BPD, or you were, that was you, before, as they misperceive rather, and are re-experiencing from the past, putting into here now, that they're about to be abandoned. This happens when the person closest, object other, so that's in any relationship type. If you were close to somebody with BPD, or you are the object other to them subconsciously. So when you are that object other, you feel abandoned. You are no longer reflecting back what the person with BPD needs reflected back, quote, of self or missing self, unquote, from you, because this often leads to a repeat of primal ruptured relationship that causes the arrested emotional development in the first place. So they're repeating this in the here and now, or they did with you in the then and there of that present, if you're an ex of someone with BPD. When a person with BPD cuts off a favorite person, relative, or partner, they are re-experiencing that primal rupture in attachment, but they think it's coming from you in the here and now because your object other representation of the wounding parent in devaluation, and they don't have a self from which to hold these feelings. So the projective identification that they've already done with you and continue to do with you means you're not really supposed to feel anything or have your own emotions. You're supposed to just mirror what they think and feel. By the way, you're supposed to be a mind reader too. The cycle then will entirely repeat again with someone else who will become the next object other. People with BPD can't take in people's love, care, and positive from, quote, object other, unquote. And this also leads to the repetition compulsion cycle of relational rupture time and time again. So other than those who are clingy and needy and the fear of abandonment stays higher than the fear of engulfment, then they're not going anywhere. But as we're seeing more and more people talk about online, excess of BPD, or people struggling, still hopeful that a relationship could work out, especially with somebody who isn't in treatment with BPD, then what's happening there is that they've gone from abandonment fear to the engulfment annihilation fear when people are close, or for the person with BPD, too close. For many people with BPD who might be with another cluster B partner treating them terribly, unfortunately they will stay because it is familiar to them and they feel at least like they won't be abandoned, and or maybe they just don't know how to leave this object other representation now that they have done the projective identification onto. So it's like the comfort of the chaos and drama of stormy relating that is a re-experiencing of interrupted attachment, and the approach avoidance conflict of fear of abandonment at one end of relating when distance cannot be tolerated by people with BPD and their fear of abandonment rises so high, and at the other end of relating when closeness is achieved and you think everything's going great, person with BPD often then is fearing engulfment and annihilation, which again rises from the subconscious, and they don't understand why they feel what they're feeling, but it's very distressing to them. And so when they have these fears, they're too close, and then they have the primal re-experiencing of the other end of the spectrum. So the engulfment annihilation struggle which causes many of them then to just ghost and discard. Maybe cyclically, but sometimes for good, right? For people with BPD, the primary experiencing of this approach avoidance struggle is really their only true, lack of a better way to put it, their only true attachment style. So it's not really an attachment style, but that's the issue. They really can't attach to you because they're always going from, or often, if not, more often than not, going from fear of abandonment to fear of engulfment. So maybe it's a little distance, or you just wanted to spend a half an hour with your mother or talk to somebody on the phone. They might then fear abandonment, and you're going to see that reaction and conflict and chaos or withdrawal and silent treatment. And then when you are close and you're giving them attention, and it's not quote narcissistic supply that people with BPD need, validation, reassurance, and they're getting their identity from you. So it means in a way it's not your responsibility, but their feelings, they're taking cues for their feelings from you, when really it's how they're feeling internally, but they put that out onto you. This approach avoidance conflict is something that's usually resolved in the rapprochement phase of early childhood development, whereby the child learns that they can go a little further away from mother and come back and mother will be there. But people with BPD in the 75% have arrested emotional development before the rapprochement phase, where in the approach avoidance conflict in a healthy situation between a parent and child would have been resolved in that early phase of development just after. This was just my response to C4's comment on my video that BPD is not DID, that what is going on for people with BPD, they feel like they're a different person when they have different feelings because they don't know who they are. So these different mood states can have some of them thinking, oh wow, maybe I'm like a whole different person. They're chameleons by the very nature of a lack of self and arrested emotional development. So they're always trying in a way to be who they think somebody else wants them to be. And then sometimes they get into conflict with that because then suddenly they're angry about, well, that they think you're making them be someone that they're not. And that goes back to what might have happened in early childhood for them too. BPD is definitely not DID. When people are triggered to emotional dysregulation, it's a re-experiencing, often with age regression, of past adverse childhood experience that comes dissociatively into the here and now, often without warning. And for people with BPD with no treatment, they don't really understand what's happening to them. There can be depersonalization, derealization, and really extreme degrees of dissociation experienced by those with BPD, different mood states, partially being aware of the here and now, being more in the past, not realizing their past has come right up in a dissociated way into the here and now, can be described in many different ways, but it just is not different people, different personalities, it's different mood states, it's different aspects of a person with BPD who doesn't know who they are and doesn't know what's happening to them emotionally inside. And so you're going to see different reactions. People have mentioned cold eyes, cold stares, different head movements, distancing versus clingy versus helplessness versus anger and rage. These are all happening within what are just too many emotions from the primal that were arrested development. People don't have a self. They don't know how to deal with it. It's not separate identities or alters. So I just want to make that really clear once again. Hope that was helpful, thought-provoking, educational, or something worthy like that for you. Take care.